Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the IRCGN, that is the Central Ballistics Lab of the French Gendarmerie Nationale, by their generous invitation to film a couple of pretty cool rare guns for you guys. And what we're looking at today are a pair of HK-33Fs. Now, you may have heard of the 416F. Well, 50 years before that, there was the 33F, and with the same designation for the same reason, marketing these guns to the French military and police establishment. So, as far back as the 1960s, the French were interested in what was going on at HK, understandably. In 1967, they bought 5 each of the HK-33, which was in 5.56 NATO, and the HK-32, which is the same, essentially the same gun, but in 7.62 by 39. Now, that didn't have any immediate impact. The guns were presumably tested, experimented with, investigated. It wouldn't be until the mid to late 1970s, well, 1974, that the French start doing some more serious trials. They're looking to replace the MOS 4956 with a new 5.56 caliber rifle. France would not ever adopt ammunition interchangeability with NATO, or they didn't adopt the NATO standard cartridge, but they did recognize that, you know, if we're going to go to war in the Cold War here, it's going to be in alliance with all of the NATO powers, and the 5.56 cartridge looks like a good idea, and it makes sense for us to be ammunition compatible. So they tested in 74, like all of the major rifles that were available on the market, and the front runners were the FN Cal, the M16 from Colt, and the HK-33. And apparently the HK-33 won the trial, was the best contender, but it wasn't politically acceptable ultimately for the French to adopt a German rifle. Of course, that would change 50 years later, but instead they decided to develop, or to continue developing and adopt, a domestic design. That, of course, would become the FAMAS. But in the meantime, we still have the French variation on the HK-33, because in order to properly compete for French military contracts, there were a number of changes that had to be made to the standard HK-33, namely setting it up to be compatible with rifle grenades. The 4956 used rifle grenades, the FAMAS used rifle grenades. They were a staple of French military infantry doctrine. So let's take a closer look here and let me show you what they did, what's different about the HK-33F. Sorry for the interruption. Just want to say that today's video is brought to you by Headstamp Publishing, with an extensive catalog of books on all sorts of interesting and esoteric small arms, everything from World War II small arms to Imperial Japanese swords to the earliest of revolvers and Cold War battle rifles. There is something at Headstamp for every firearms enthusiast. Check it out. Links in the description text below. All right, so we have 2 models to look at here, because this was made both with a fixed stock and a collapsing stock, the A3 type stock. I'm going to go ahead and pull the magazines just to make these a little easier to handle here. They do take all standard HK-33 magazines, calibers standard 5.56. And here are our markings on the collapsing stock model, HK-33F. Serial number is in the 13,000 range, caliber 5.56. All of the internals here are totally standard. This is generic standard HK roller delayed blowback. We also have a second reinforcing rib added to the magazine well there, which is subtle and interesting. That's not on other HK patterns. I suspect it is there to help reinforce the magazine well against the wobble that you will get in the magazine when you fire a rifle grenade. Again, this is all basically rifle grenade modification stuff. Since we have markings on the magazine well, we don't have any on the top of the receiver there. And the opposite side of the mag well is blank. Our fixed stock model here has the same markings on it. It is all of 19 serial numbers off from the other one, so very close in production, obviously being done at the same time. Before we even get to the grenade launchers, I will point out the other change that was made for the F pattern, and that is to give the guns a 3-round burst option. So the FAMAS would, of course, be adopted with a 0, 1, full, or 3-round fire control system, and they did the same thing to these HK-33s. So safe, semi-auto, unrestricted full auto, and 3-round burst. That is a sort of non-standard, at the time, HK trigger pack style. Now, moving from the back of the gun to the front, the fixed stock guns got an extra long rubber butt pad. That is to help absorb some of the recoil of launching rifle grenades when it's done from the shoulder. Sometimes that's done from the shoulder, sometimes it's done slung underarm, but that's nice to have if you're launching grenades from the shoulder. In order to help absorb the recoil of the grenades, the gun got 2 pins here on the buttstock, and that's kind of normal for, say, the G3, although on the G3, both of the pins are down here. Well, on the standard pattern of the HK33, you have just 1 pin at the bottom, like the MP5. And then we have everything else going on out here at the muzzle. So this has been given rings on the barrel. These are each marked with a number, and these are the range of the rifle grenade. So you take this stop block, push that button in, and you can slide it up and down the barrel. That is going to adjust how long the grenade is sitting on the barrel while it's being propelled by a blank cartridge. So the farther back this is, the more propulsion the grenade gets, and the longer the range. The farther forward, the shorter the range. So that's on there for range. And then we have 2 different sighting systems that have been set up. One of them is this little lug at the top of the front sight. That is for rifle grenade sighting. And then for more sophisticated sighting, there's a mounting plate here for a rifle grenade sight, which unfortunately I don't have an example of. But you can see the exact same modifications on our collapsing stock version here. And the collapsing stock also has the dual connecting pins at the back to sustain grenade recoil. For what it's worth, here is one of the original French trials HK33s. This red paint indicates that it came out of a French testing base where they circled the serial numbers in red paint just to help keep track of things. But you can see here, this is marked just HK33. This is 7, so July 1973 manufacture. It has this interesting extra added strengthening rib on the magazine well, which is a little bit unusual. But then you can see the other French features, like that second recoil pin on the buttstock. That has just been sort of added in. It's been welded in place, modified to give it that second pin. We have the 4-position fire control group. Out here at the front, we have that mounting plate for the rifle grenade launcher. This one does not have the added grenade sight on the front sight hood, and it does have the grenade rings, although they're done a little bit differently. They don't quite fully encircle the barrel, and this gun is in kind of poor condition because, well, it went through some sort of testing program that left it a little beat up. So these rifles were originally made in Germany. In fact, the collection here has one of the original trials guns that has been modified to add all of these features to it. The pattern then went into full-scale production, as you can see from these 2 examples. And it's not entirely clear to me if these were always manufactured in Germany or if manufacture moved to France, because MAS did, in fact, manufacture HK33s. This is the other pattern of HK33F that was also made, and it has none of the grenade launcher modifications. This is a totally standard HK33 with the exception of having a slightly heavier barrel, and this one is actually marked MAS. This pattern is still marked HK33F, and the serial number is basically the same, except it has this added 3 prefix range, and it's now marked MAS 1977. And you can see here that this has a standard SEF 3-position trigger pack, and it has the standard single-pin buttstock. Now, the story behind this, as I understand it, is that the West German police forces wanted to get HK products in the 1970s, and they couldn't because, of course, Berlin is a self-contained enclave within Soviet East Germany, and they couldn't, like, weirdly, ironically, they could not import German guns into Berlin. They had to come from elsewhere, and so HK made an arrangement with MAS, with Saint-Étienne, to basically provide all of the components. MAS would assemble the rifles, mark them MAS, manufactured in France, And then they could be imported as French guns into Berlin, and the West German police could get their guns. This also created an opportunity to make sales of HK guns, HK pattern guns, to countries that were in the Francophone sphere of influence. So former French colonial areas, places that had a connection to France and would be much more likely to buy French-connected small arms than, say, German ones. And so ultimately, MAS would add the HK G3, HK 33, and MP5 to its export catalog, and it made sales to a number of small countries that fit that exact idea. So they sold rifles to Haiti, they sold rifles to Lebanon, they sold rifles to Upper Volta, which is now Burkina Faso, and a couple other, Senegal, I believe, a couple other small ex-colonial nations. So the guns like this one were in fact assembled at MAS in France from primarily German-made parts. Unfortunately, I don't have any good info on exactly how many were made. I don't know what the timeline is. The ones that I see here at the IRCGN collection are all dated 77 to 79. HK would also enter an agreement like this with Enfield, and you will see MP5s and G3s in particular that are marked EN, that were manufactured at Enfield under similar sorts of arrangements. So there's not much information out there on the French pattern HKs. I think perhaps HK doesn't really like to talk about it much, maybe. But if you know where there's a good source of info on these, I would love to find out more, get some details about these. Hopefully you enjoyed getting a chance to take a close look at both of these patterns and see what exactly makes them a bit distinct. And big thanks to the IRCGN, the French Gendarmerie Nationale, for giving me access to their collection to film these for you. Thanks for watching.